Hi, I'm Rebecca.
And I'm Charlene. Welcome to Empowered, Life Lessons of Everyday Women.
Each episode, you're going to meet an amazing woman who has struggled through challenges both in her home life and work life and has become very successful.
Meet Irma. Her law career spanned over 20 years as a prosecutor and a judge, finding and establishing mentorship support for herself and other legal professionals. She brings a great perspective on managing legal challenges.
Grab a cup of coffee, get in a comfy chair, and let's talk to Irma. Welcome, Irma.
Well, thank you very much for including me in your podcast. I'm excited.
It's been fun for us, for sure. If you were able to go back and give your 20-year-old self a piece of advice, what would that be?
You know, that is a very good question because at 20 years, I don't think I was very mature, but I couldn't wait to turn 21. And I guess the best advice to myself would be don't be in a hurry to turn 21. Don't be in a hurry to get married. You know, I got married early at age 23. I was engaged at age 21. You know, and all my girlfriends at that time had steady boyfriends. They were engaged or getting married. Don't rush it.
You change a lot from the time you're 20 till 25 to 30. I mean, it's an ever-changing person.
And to get into a marriage relationship at that young age, or to be thinking about it, I would tell myself, no, there are too many other things in life to enjoy.
I totally understand. What made you decide to get a law degree?
That's a good question. I never intended to get a law degree. My dad was a doctor, and I was the oldest of 7 children, and I was going to be a doctor. That's all I ever heard my whole life. I was going to be a doctor. In fact, in college, I was pre-med. I started taking some history courses, loved them. I didn't like all the science I took science courses and math courses. So I was going to be a doctor. And then finally I decided, why do I want to be a doctor? What do I really want to do? Am I doing it just because that's what my dad wants me to be, or that's what I've ever thought of? So I knew I wanted a career. I knew I wanted a professional career. I knew that with a law degree, you can major in anything, history, political science, math, anything. And so I decided just quickly when I was a junior in college that I wanted to go to law school. And it was only 3 years as opposed to 4 years of medical school.
That's true. That there is that benefit. Mm-hmm. Who do you think your biggest influence has been?
In my life?
Yeah.
I think my father, from when I was young, from the time I was young. And I don't mean to bleed my mother out. She spent a lot of time raising 7 children. But
yeah, that's daunting.
That is very daunting. And now that I look back on it, and she's still alive, and I'm still her little girl. So, but I would say my dad, he was an orphan. He went to medical school. He did so much on his own without parents, and he instilled that in all of his children, that you've got to have a career, you've got to fend for yourself and earn a living on your own. And he was the biggest influence in my life. And
he really made sure that you knew that you can't depend on anybody else. You've got to depend on yourself.
Absolutely. And we all have advanced degrees, all 7 of us. We all, could do it on our own if we had to. But
that's huge, because there aren't very many people that can say that. There's a lot of families that they're first generation now going into college. So for everyone in your family, that's really impressive.
And it was all because we were pushed. I mean, we were pushed, but I'm grateful for it now. I really am. And I look back on it and I know that a lot of it was because of my father and my mother too. But my father really, he was the one that pulled himself up from his bootstraps.
Right.
He was an example for us.
Yeah, he demonstrated that ability. That's great. So when you were in law school, you decided to do clerk. You clerked for a judge, I believe. So what was that about? Why did you decide to clerk for a judge rather than going and working in a law firm as a interim?
Well, first of all, I was fascinated with the courtroom, and I had observed trials, and I'd been in as a law student, you're fascinated with what we call litigation, being in the courtroom and watching TV and watching lawyers.
Right.
And so, what better experience to train me to be a courtroom lawyer than to work for a judge who, on a daily basis, was in the courtroom? I could help the judge, doing legal research. I could observe the judge in the courtroom, observe the lawyers, more importantly, because at that time, initially, when I was first out of law school, I just wanted to be a litigator, a courtroom lawyer. And so the best way to do it, I thought, was to get this wonderful training from this judge that I worked for almost 2 years.
So you really were able to maybe not necessarily use them as mentors, but as role models of what to do and what not to do.
Exactly. He was, you're right. He wasn't a real mentor. In a way, he was. I mean, he obviously I'd talked to him in chambers in his office about, what went on in the courtroom, what his ideas were, why his criticism or his praise of how the lawyers did. So that really enhanced my knowledge of what a lawyer should be, how a lawyer should act in the courtroom.
So I'm sure you had a wide variety of challenges in that career. Can you talk about what some of those challenges were and how you went about working through them?
When I graduated from law school, it was 1973, and there were very few women in my class. There were maybe less than 10 of us, and there were no women professors. So I was really in a man's world, and I never thought about it before I decided to go to law school. Probably would have been the same in medical school. You always wonder what the men are thinking about a woman being in their world. You have to be strong. You have to show that you are just as smart or talented as the men are. So there were a lot of challenges in just being a woman, and we didn't have mentors back then. There weren't so many organizations that really mentor women in various professions, and back then we were kind of floundering. We'd get together and study, but most of my study mates were men. So you just have to learn how to navigate through this man's world and do it in a way that's you're hoping they're not resentful
Right.
against you. Why is she in law school? What is she trying to prove? And I was a Hispanic. There were no Hispanic. There was one other woman in my class who was Hispanic, and there were no men that were Hispanic. So
wow. So it was almost like a double whammy, right? I mean, you had the female aspect, but you also had a minority aspect as well. Do you think you were treated differently because of that?
It's hard to say because I didn't know how I should be treated. I think men thought, well, I'm taking someone's place, one of their own who probably would have done just as well in law school. Yes. And did I get in because I'm Mexican? Maybe that had something to do with it, but I don't think it was a totally affirmative action. I'm sure it wasn't at the time because they really weren't emphasizing that.
I was going to say at that point in time, it was not that prevalent at all.
No, it was not at all. So, hopefully, I got into my merit. Later on, as the years progressed, when affirmative action became a real big thing, and then certainly there was a lot of focus on how individuals got into law school or got certain positions in the law.
Mm-hmm.
So, Irma, one of the things that we like to dive into is the balance between home and work life. So at the time that you were in law school or clerking, were you also trying to balance sort of what I call a traditional home life, or did you have your children, or did you have children?
Yes, I have one daughter, and I waited a little bit. There was no maternity leave either. So I went into the US Attorney's Office. I was a prosecutor. I was married, and I always wanted to have children, but you're concentrating on your career. So I wanted to concentrate on my career. So I waited 5 years. I was 28 when I had my daughter, because back then you had to concentrate on your career. And when Amy was born, I went back to work 3 weeks later.
Oh my goodness.
that was the way you did it back then.
Right,
So that's
right.
really a lot to ask. And I think, now with maternity leave and paternity leave and, understanding the importance of kind of being there at the beginning for your child and for
Mhm.
yourself, that bonding, it's really a different world than it
Right.
was.
And I always had to have someone take care of my child.
Right.
I wasn't there a lot.
Well, especially as a prosecutor, it's not necessarily a 9 to 5 job, right? You've certainly had, I'm sure, long hours getting ready for the courtroom, and you
Right.
don't know how long the courtroom is going to last.
And I'd work on I would take Amy to work at night or on weekends, and she could play, in the office or whatever. You learn how to manage. At that time, I couldn't afford a nanny on my salary, and my husband at that time is that I went through a divorce. And my husband was a lawyer too, but there were a lot of issues that we had to work through. And unfortunately, we ended up getting a divorce. And so for a short while, for about 4 years, I was a single mom, in addition to trying to work and everything.
That's hard. That's really difficult. I know what that's like. I was a single mom for many years with 3 kids going, working full time. And it's a challenge. You feel torn. You feel totally torn.
And I ended up only having one daughter.
So a few years back, I actually was on a grand jury for several months in Arizona. And one of the things that I found really interesting is the cases that we would review. Some of them were absolutely horrific. And I found it very difficult for me to process that when I got off of jury duty for that day. I am sure in your career, you came across that both as a prosecutor and as a judge. How were you able to, I guess, process that and not take it home and have it affect your personal life?
We're all human.
Yeah.
You try to be objective and separate what happens at work from your home life. I'm sure in any job that anyone has, it's hard to not think about it. And as a prosecutor, I felt I was doing the right thing, that whoever I was in court accused of a crime, and I would never have taken a case to trial if I didn't think the person was guilty. That doesn't, but the jury has to make that finding. It affected me more as a judge because as a judge, I had to sentence people. And for me, that was the worst part of being a judge, is that truly believe that there are very few bad, really bad people in this world. Most people that commit crimes make bad judgments. They do it for a lot of reasons. They do it because they don't have they're trying to make money. They could be the most educated individuals,
Right.
still commit crimes. So and then you have to sentence these young people. And by young, I meant 20 somethings. I really didn't do juvenile law. But any time in jail is really a terrible thing. I think every young person should go visit a prison because you never want to ever end up in it.
I can't even, yeah, I couldn't imagine that. I mean, I kind of understand where you're coming from, because I believe that everybody has got a good heart, and there are exceptions to every rule. And, there are the Ted Bundys out there. I realize that. But I think for the most part, people are good at heart. And so when you hear about some of the horrific things that people do, it was hard for me, at least on the jury duty, to not think that it was a broader problem than it really was.
And you wouldn't hear a lot about, before I sentenced or before I prosecuted somebody, I pretty much knew a lot about that person's background and why they may have done this, more than maybe you had heard as a grand juror, or even jurors who are on what we call petit jurors, when the trial actually takes place. So when you know the background of the person and maybe why they did something, it makes it even more difficult to sentence.
Well, I can imagine. Yeah, I can imagine. So you were a prosecutor for a while, and then you went into private practice. What made you change to move into private?
In a way, I was tired of just criminal law. I loved everything I did in the courtroom, but a couple of people family members started asking me about contracts. And I hadn't looked at a contract since law school. And I thought, you know what? There are so many areas of the law that a lawyer can concentrate on. One of them is criminal. You can be a criminal defense lawyer in defending individuals who are accused of crimes. You can be a prosecutor. And then you can be a civil lawyer and take cases that involve mainly money that they want. And so I went to a law firm, and it was, I don't know if it was a breath of fresh air. It's just a different type of law that you're concentrating on. And it was a great learning experience because I learned a lot. The civil procedure is different than criminal procedure. And the facts of a civil case are so much different than a criminal case.
And how long were you in the private law firm?
I was only there for 3 years.
Oh,
so it wasn't a long time. I did try a couple of cases and really learned a lot about taking depositions. I don't know if you've ever been in a deposition, taking depositions and trying to settle the case and getting to know the lawyers in San Diego, there. So it was a really, and I had a mentor. I did have a mentor at the law firm who was a fabulous lawyer. I learned a lot from him.
So what advice would you give to our listeners to either find or have, if they have a mentor, what advice would you give to them about mentorship? And did you mentor anybody in your career?
Oh, yes, a lot. I've mentored lots of young women, mainly women, who are thinking of going to law school, or young women who are just going into practice. Do they go into private practice? Do they try to go into the public sector, public defender or prosecutor? And I have spent many, many years mentoring. I think it's so important. And I think a lot of women, especially, are afraid to ask, are afraid to ask advice, or afraid to ask someone to help them with something. And I think that really that's hard to overcome. And probably men too. And
I think sometimes when people feel like if they have to ask a question, it makes them seem weak.
Right.
And I think that that's something that they have to get over, because it's not necessarily a sign of weakness. It's a sign of maybe curiosity or trying to expand yourself.
Yeah, I was going to say it's a sign, in my opinion, it's a sign of trying to make yourself better at your career because you're getting somebody else's input or somebody else's advice on how to move forward. But I do think people see it as a sign of weakness as well.
I agree.
Which is why they don't step into that, especially as an attorney.
I'm a true believer in mentorship. I think it's very important for young people and even colleagues. I have no qualms about having gone to a colleague of mine saying, this happened. I don't know. How would you handle it? Or what advice can you give me? And people love to be asked advice.
They do.
They love to talk about themselves.
We're afraid to ask.
Which kind of leads me to another question, which is, you utilize networking in your career, obviously, because that's how you're able to utilize opinions, but also to get advice. Yeah, how did networking fit into your career?
Very much so. I mean, in fact, right now, I belong to an organization called Lawyers Club, and it's a network of women and men who we have seminars on various issues. We have panel discussions that we present. And I was very involved to this other organization that I helped found called Latinas in the Law for young Hispanic women who either were law students or young lawyers, because they have very different problems sometimes to overcome. The organization that I helped form was a networking organization where we'd make ourselves available for questions. We'd have 3 or 4 presentations every year where we invited the Hispanic women and men to come in and listen to a panel discussion about certain issues. And so that to me is networking. That is what I think helping someone in a certain profession is all about.
That's wonderful. Is that organization, is that just in California or is that across the country?
It's just in San Diego.
Wow.
San Diego.
That sounds like a fabulous
It's wonderful.
Group.
I mean, yes, there were two other women. 3 of us decided we're going to do this, and now it's grown a lot, and it's still really viable.
So what made you become a judge? How did that come about?
Well, part of it was being in the courtroom. I admired judges. I had great respect for them. And I felt that they were a very important part of society and the rule of law. There were really, and I think a lot of lawyers want to be judges. A lot of young lawyers look to that as their final step in their career. I I decided I would start to see how you do it, and it's very difficult because it is somewhat political and at times very political, and so you have to know how to navigate and you that's when you really ask advice. You go to people, you go to judges. And another person who has helped me in my career is my husband, who's a lawyer, and he has always encouraged me. He gives me advice on certain ways to do it. And he once told me, go talk to Judge so and so, Judge Gray, and ask him for advice. Ask him how he did it. I said, no, I'm too afraid. He says, no, go do it. So, and I did. So
empower yourself to go ask him.
Exactly.
Right?
So it's a long process, but I was very blessed to end up as a federal judge.
I was going to ask you, did you face any type of harassment? I mean, you were talking a little bit that it was difficult, but any kind of harassment along the way as you went through your career, including becoming a judge?
I don't know about harassment, but I know lawyers. I can tell when lawyers or others don't have a lot of respect for you or don't value who you are. Sometimes it's very subtle. And they're not going to come right out and say, oh, you're a woman or you're, Hispanic. You've got this job just because,
right.
You were, but I know they think that. I know they think that. And so that puts a lot more pressure on women and people that are minorities of color to prove yourself. So you really have to work even harder to prove yourself.
Yeah, I mean, harassment is one of those things that can be subtle or it can be very obvious. And to me, when you don't show somebody respect because of either being a female or a different nationality, that is a form of harassment.
Oh, yeah.
It's just not as visual, I
blatant.
guess.
Yeah.
Blatant is a better word.
Right.
Yes.
Right. So you have to ignore. You really have to have a lot of confidence in yourself. And that's hard. We're not all. There are times I go out in the courtroom and I'm thinking, I have to make a decision and I have to, oh my gosh, what am I? But you can't show that.
Right.
Right.
You really come across as a weak person.
Right.
Right. So did you ever have any issues being in the public spotlight like that?
Oh, no, I don't. I always wondered what people think, but you can't let that bother you. I was in the spotlight a lot. I mean, I was the chief judge of my court. That meant that I was the chief administrative person for the court, and I did a lot of public speaking. I did a lot of making decisions about certain procedures and rules and discipline, and I was in the spotlight a lot. And people, I'm sure, thought to themselves, why is she doing this? Or does she really think she has the power to do this? And I thank goodness, hopefully, I demanded respect, and I think I got it 99% of the time. I was in the spotlight a lot, and newspaper. I have notebooks of articles written about me, about certain things I did, certain cases, certain awards I got, things like that. So I was in the spotlight a lot.
And it sounds like you were a front runner for that time and for who you were, being female, being Hispanic, so good job and great for you that you did that. So what was your biggest life lesson that you would like to share with our listeners?
Oh, gosh. I think it's important for every person to be ethical, and no matter what you do. I guess because I was in the public sector most of my career, I was very concerned about ethics, about doing things the right way, and about reputation. It doesn't make any difference what career you're in. If you're, You could be work in a construction company, as an office person, work as a lawyer, work as a doctor. If your reputation follows you no matter where you go, and if you don't establish an ethical, good reputation from the very beginning of your career, then that hurts. So I've learned that that's a life lesson, I think, for everybody, for me especially, because you are out in the public sector. I had to do everything the right way. Ethically is what I mean. People will disagree whether it's the right way or wrong way, but if I personally think I'm doing it correctly and ethically, and I'm respected for it, and I establish a good reputation, people will respect me, whether they agree with me or not. And I know criticism about judges, especially now in the news, that you just hope that the judge is making a decision that the judge feels is the best decision based on all the facts in front of that judge. And if that judge is ethical and you respect that judge, then you have to then respect the decision,
right?
Whether you agree with it or not.
So any other advice you would like to leave with our listeners before we close this podcast?
Well, you mentioned the mentoring. I think that's really, really important. And, and asking advice. And even nowadays, we should still, if there's something new that you're trying, and I think that what's important for young people is to not be afraid to reach for the highest level of whatever you feel would be the highest level of what your occupation is. I mean, I started as a law clerk. I pursued being a prosecutor, pursued being in private practice. I wanted to be a judge, and you pursue it. And so don't give up. I mean, a lot of it is luck, but a lot of it is hard work. And you work hard at it. And I was disappointed along the way, and don't be afraid of disappointments, and pick yourself up and try again.
That's great. I think that's fantastic.
It was wonderful.
Reaching for the stars.
Yep.
Exactly.
I totally agree. You can't give up.
Yep.
Not give up.
This has been wonderful, Irma. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
To our listeners, we hope you enjoyed this episode of Empowered, Life Lessons of Everyday Women. We would really appreciate if you could leave us a rating or a review. If you have any challenges or questions you are facing, we want to hear from you, as we value your input and suggestions. And if you have a compelling story or life lesson you would like to share, please connect with us at empoweredlifelessons@gmail.com. You can also find us on Facebook, Instagram, other social media platforms, or visit us at empoweredlifelessons.com. In our next episode, meet Vida. Vida is the COO of the Smarter Service. Our conversation was so insightful, we broke it up into 2 parts. In part 1, listen to how mentors have played a huge role in helping Vida be successful throughout her career.